I'm Gavin. History can be fun with both its ups and downs. Join me in an episode of Modern Philippine History.
I don't know anything about history, but I would like to learn more.
So, as a young student, it is important for me to know history because that is how we know where we came from, who are our heroes, and what happened in the past.
I want students to be able to learn the history in a very truthful manner so that they can know the full extent of history without any bias.
The Philippines has been governed under 3 constitutions, the first of which was promulgated in 1935, during the American colonial times. It was closely modeled on the U.S. Constitution. It included provisions for a bicameral legislative branch, an executive branch headed by a president, and an independent judiciary. Elpidio Quirino was the last vice president elected before independence in 1946, and the second president elected after independence. His presidency, which began in 1948, was marked by post-war reconstruction and socio-economic gains, as well as the establishment of the Central Bank of the Philippines. However, his presidency was tainted by corruption and the growing communist threat, and in 1953, he was impeached for allegedly stealing a golden Orinola. Quirino ran for re-election against Ramon Magsaysay, his vice president, who defeated him and became president from 1953 until he was killed in a plane crash in 1957, making him one of the shortest-serving presidents of the Philippines. However, in his 3.5-year term, Magsaysay resettled landless farmers, restored peace and order, and reformed the army. Magsaysay was succeeded by his vice president, Carlos P. Garcia, who enhanced the Philippines' art and culture by issuing the Philippine Culture Awards, which aimed to give scientists, artists, and historians the recognition they needed during the long periods of colonialism. He also issued the austerity program, which aimed to curtail the rampant graft and corruption in the government. However, corruption still existed, and in the 1961 election, he was defeated by Vice President Diosdado Macapagal, who belonged to the rival Liberal Party. Diosdado Macapagal, whose term lasted from 1961 to 1965, was the first ever president to be elected from a rival party to the presidency. During his term, he issued the Philippines' first land reform law, placed the Philippine peso on the free currency exchange market, and liberalized foreign exchange and import controls. However, he prevented his government from tracking down the sources of corruption and failed to solve major socio-economic problems. 1965 began the era of Ferdinand Marcos Sr., the longest-serving president, and the only president to be re-elected for a second 4-year term in 1969 under the 1935 Constitution. During his presidency, he built many well-publicized public works projects like roads, schools, health centers, bridges, and urban beautification schemes. This video will give you an insight on how life was like during martial law. Later, I will be talking about the facts surrounding martial law. Lastly, I have especially interviewed my grandparents to give their take on how life was like during that period in time.
proclaimed martial law in accordance with the powers vested in the President by the Constitution of the Philippines.
On the 21st of September, 1972, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. signed Proclamation number 1081, which put the Philippines under martial law. However, in the years that followed, his administration was marked by rampant corruption and cronyism, as well as human rights abuses. And in 1973, he changed the Constitution and curtailed civil liberties to give him an unlimited stay in power during the martial law period. Marcos' administration would also be infamous for a number of dreadful events that happened during his 21-year tenure, including the assassination of the opposition Liberal Party Senator Benigno S. Aquino Jr. in 1983 at the airport, and the Plaza Miranda bombing in 1971, which occurred at a proclamation rally for the opposition Liberal Party and resulted in 9 deaths and 95 injuries. How old were you during martial law?
I'm 24.
I am 27.
What is your memory of how life was like during martial law?
Martial law.
I think
It's
It
the
is-
dark time to us Filipino because we don't have freedom,
the life
human
not
rights.
comfortable for the Filipinos. Most of the Filipinos.
The years after martial law, what was life like in the Philippines?
It's a little better because the next government is handled by President Cory Aquino.
What is your hope for now and the future of the Philippines?
Better future to all of the people of Philippines.
In 1986, Ferdinand Marcos Sr. was overthrown in a successful military and church-led revolution called the People Power Revolution. A huge opposition movement gathered around Maria Corazon, Cory Aquino, the widow of the assassinated senator Benigno S. Aquino Jr. After she had stood against Marcos Sr. during a snap election, however, Marcos Sr. won amid mass electoral fraud, igniting mass protests. After 4 days, Marcos Sr. and his family fled to Guam and then to Hawaii. His successor, Maria Corazon, Cory Aquino, was then sworn into office and changed the Constitution to limit the president's power. And as a result, the common people benefited from her administration, as they were just coming out of the repressive and corrupt Marcos Sr. dictatorship in order to look for democracy and freedom. However, her administration would be hounded by various coup attempts and put primary focus on disaster management. In 1992, just as Cory Aquino's 6-year term was coming to an end, the people elected retired General Fidel V. Ramos, the former Marcos era chief of the Philippine Constabulary, and he became the next president. Ramos was responsible for an agrarian reform program which benefited fishermen, farmers, and agricultural businesses. Also, his administration gave foreign investors the confidence to invest in the Philippines and opened the Philippines to the world. Additionally, he enacted the 1996 Migrant Workers Act through negotiations with the ambassador to the United Arab Emirates. However, his administration was accused of corruption because they had favored a development company to give them a large portion of reclaimed land in Manila Bay for their own intentions and were blamed for failing to negotiate the 1995 Flor Contemplacion case properly with the Singapore government. During the 1998 elections, the people chose Vice President Joseph Ejercito Estrada, a former action movie star, as Ramos' successor. Joseph Estrada would become the shortest-serving Philippine president, as, although he was responsible for another Agrarian Reform Act focused on farmers in rural areas, and he further opened the Philippines to foreign businesses, his presidency ended prematurely due to graft, corruption, and cronyism. Estrada was replaced by Gloria Macapagal Arroyo, the daughter of former President Diosdado Macapagal, who became the Philippines' second longest-serving president. Her presidency was marked by peacefully suppressing a coup against her administration. However, she had many failures in her administration, such as poor handling of the poverty situation and her hybrid rice commercialization program, which was considered ineffective and expensive. Gloria Macapagal Arroyo was succeeded by Benigno Pinoy Aquino III, the only son of the slain Senator Benigno S. Aquino Jr. and former President Corazon Aquino. As president, Pinoy's administration approved many public-private partnership deals and made the Philippines one of the fastest-growing economies in Asia. One significant act took China to the Permanent Court of Arbitration in the Netherlands to negotiate a territorial issue and eventually won the case. However, his administration was implicated in the pork barrel scam, as several senators and congressmen were accused of misusing their Priority Development Assistance Fund, which was a discretionary fund available to members of Congress. Pinoy was succeeded by Rodrigo Roa Duterte, the populist, tough-talking longtime mayor of Davao City. As president, he institutionalized the national identification system and criminalized child marriage, as well as improved infrastructure and transport accessibility options for Filipinos. However, Duterte secretly approved the reburial of the late dictator Ferdinand Marcos Sr. in the Heroes Cemetery, sparking anger amongst many youthful protesters because Marcos is considered by many to be evil and not a hero. Duterte failed to respond to the COVID-19 pandemic well, as his vaccination rollout was relatively slow.
This video will introduce you to what was the bloodiest episode of the Duterte administration, the war on drugs.
The crime and drug-infested shanties of the Philippine archipelago have been turned into a drug war zone in the 5 bloody years of Rodrigo Duterte's presidency.
It's not a dog, my son. It's not a dog or a pig to kill like them.
The 6,000 killed by police, by their own accounting, a fraction of the body count. Thousands more were shot dead by masked assassins who have stalked the country's slums. A reign of terror, openly incited by the president himself.
Most notably, his war on drugs was the bloodiest episode in his administration, drawing international attention, and many continue to be killed by police under this initiative to this day. Duterte backed Ferdinand Bongbong Marcos Jr., the only son of former President Ferdinand Marcos Sr., and First Lady Imelda Marcos as his successor. Now, as Marcos Jr. starts to solidify his control over the Philippines and tries to rebrand his family's image in Philippine politics, we have to wait and see what he will do and what actions he will take for the Philippines.
In the last 70 years, many of the successes and struggles of Filipinos are due to the leaders, people, and the local and global landscape. As a young Filipino, I hope for a better future in my home country. History and its value must be preserved, respected, and taught as facts, so that we can learn from our past and do better in the future. A people without the knowledge of their past history, origins, and culture is like a tree without roots. Join me again in another episode of Gavin's Historical Documentaries.